The map of our world is about to change. I'm talking about the continent of Africa splitting into two. An entirely new ocean could emerge in the African continent.
Something massive is happening beneath Africa, and scientists believe it could be the beginning of a future ocean. Could the continent truly be breaking apart, or is this just another slow-moving geological shift? The East African rift is stretching, cracking, and reshaping the land, but the real question is, how soon will these changes alter the map forever? While some dismiss it as a distant event millions of years away, unexpected cracks and seismic activity suggest that this transformation might be happening faster than we think. What does this mean for the people living along the rift? And could we be witnessing the earliest stages of a new ocean forming in real time? Buckle up, because what's unfolding in Africa could change everything. The silent separation. Subterranean beneath East Africa lies a transformation of unimaginable proportions, one that will eventually reshape the continent we have come to recognize. The East African Rift is an enormous active rift system that is ever so gradually driving Africa apart to form two distinct landmasses. This is no hypothesis or distant geological occurrence. The event is happening today, driven by the relentless tectonic plate motion beneath the Earth's surface. Contrary to the subtle deformations of most continental changes, East African Rift is opening up visible fissures, widening valleys, and even sudden surface faults, the initial hints of a new ocean's birth. At the heart of this is the two diverging tectonic plates, the Somali plate to the east and the Nubian plate to the west. The plates are diverging at a rate of about 6 to 7 millimeters per year. A slow rate by human measurement, but a titanic movement in the geologic timescale. The rift runs all the way from Ethiopia's Afar region south to Mozambique, with fractures in various locations. This slow dissolution is already altering the landscape, subsiding pieces of land, forming lakes, and raising volcanic activity. As the gap increases over millions of years, eventually ocean water will flood in and split the continent apart forever. One of the most spectacular signs of this ongoing separation is the appearance of gigantic cracks on land. In some areas, like Kenya's Rift Valley, cracks have suddenly appeared, swallowing roads and homes, giving a glimpse of continental drift in real time. Seismic activity and volcanic eruptions in areas like Ethiopia's Afar Depression help to further highlight the titanic forces at work beneath the surface. Unlike gradual, non-perceptible modifications seen in other tectonic settings, the East African Rift is distinct in its ability to expose the raw power of Earth's geodynamic forces on land rather than under the ocean. The implications of Africa's silent split extend beyond geologic significance. They have very tangible effects in the lives of millions. Infrastructure, agriculture, and urban habitation all depend on the land cracking and moving unpredictably. Earthquakes and volcanoes are becoming more and more common in the area, and with them come increasing worries about safety and displacement. Researchers are tracking the rift's progress with satellite photographs and GPS coordinates, but how long it will take Africa to finally break apart is unclear. One thing for sure, however, is that the process cannot be reversed, and the gradual formation of a new ocean has already commenced. But what's really happening beneath the surface to cause this dramatic split? And could the forces at play be even more complex than we realize? Understanding the cracks. In the midst of Africa's rift lie two gigantic tectonic plates moving slowly apart, the Somali plate and the Nubian plate. They are the components of the Earth's rigid outer surface, or lithosphere, forever in motion due to forces which radiate out from within the planet. The East African Rift is the frontier of formation in between them that stretches thousands of kilometers from Ethiopia's Afar to Mozambique. It differs from the instant cataclysmic earthquakes occurring due to collisions of plates, as it is a divergent fault where plates drift away from one another, steadily pulling the crust apart and giving rise to earth fissures at great depths. One characteristic of this rift system is the Afar Triple Junction, a special geological convergence where three tectonic plates, the Somali Plate, the Nubian Plate, and the Arabian Plate, are drifting apart in different directions. This point of intersection in the north of Ethiopia is of utmost importance in deciding the destiny of the area. The Arabian Plate is also drifting northeast, lengthening the African continent further, and the Somali and Nubian plates are separating from each other along the East African Rift. This sort of active geology is the reason that the Afar region is seismically active, with volcanic eruptions and massive crustal deformations, and is one of the geologically most active regions on the planet. The East African Rift is less a continuous single cleft and more a complex set of faults split into two large branches. The Eastern Rift, or Gregory Rift, cuts through Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania, their beautiful landscapes and Rift Valley lakes. The Western Rift, or Albertine Rift, runs along Uganda, Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Burundi, Tanzania, and extends down to Malawi. These are the deeper basins and some of Africa's biggest and most important lakes, such as Lake Malawi and Lake Tanganyika. The two arms of the rift are heterogeneous in their mode of movement. Parts are dividing more quickly than others, hence irregular changes to the terrain and unpredictable seismics. Adding another surprise to the mix is the Victoria Microplate, a small tectonic plate caught between the eastern and western rifts. In a reversal of the behavior of most tectonic plates, which move in concert with the general rift system, the Victoria Microplate is rotating against trend. This anomalous behavior is being caused by variations in the Earth's lithosphere and underlying forces in the mantle. Scientists continue to study this unique motion in a bid to discover more about the way rifting processes evolve over millions of years. These geologic interactions make the East African Rift one of the most dynamic and studied rift regions on Earth, providing an unparalleled chance to observe the earliest stage of continental rifting firsthand. The Great Rift Valley versus East African Rift. The names Great Rift Valley and East African Rift tend to be synonymous, but each refers to a specific geological structure with different range and meaning. The Great Rift Valley is an older, broader term that geologists first used in the late 19th century to name a huge trench-like depression that stretches from the Middle East through Africa. It was originally believed to be a continuous single fault line that stretched from Syria to Mozambique, but current geology has further defined it, and today we understand that what was initially referred to as the Great Rift Valley is actually not one but a chain of linked rift systems, and one of its most active and influential segments is the East African Rift. The East African Rift is a particular geological component of the larger system of the Great Rift Valley. It is a region of rifting, where the African continent is gradually being torn apart to eventually create a new ocean. In contrast to the older, less tectonic western parts of the Great Rift Valley, in places such as the Jordan Rift Valley or the Ethiopian highlands, the East African Rift continues to evolve rapidly. It is marked by volcanic and seismic activity, as well as radical geological changes that make it one of the few locations on our planet where continental rifting is visible to be occurring in real time. The rift runs through nations such as Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and Mozambique, where it continues to shape the landscape with deep valleys, fault lines, and forming fissures. One of the most powerful differences between the two sentences is that the Great Rift Valley was once believed to be a single, continuous feature, while the East African Rift is now known to be a chain of tectonic fractures split between the eastern and western rifts. The Gregory Rift, or the East Rift, stretches from Tanzania to Ethiopia and is characterized by volcanic activity and enormous lakes, whereas the Western Rift, or Albertine Rift, is deeper and contains some of the greatest lakes in Africa, including Lake Malawi and Lake Tanganyika. These branches establish unequivocally that the East African Rift is not one valley, but a collection of moving and changing geological structures. It is important to identify this difference, because though the Great Rift Valley continues in common usage among textbooks, tourists, and politicians, geologists themselves concentrate on the East African Rift as being the main actor in the continental breakup. The plate motion, volcanism, and earthquakes along the rift zone will finally isolate a block of East Africa from the rest of the continent to create a new ocean. Whereas the two terms are used for large-scale geologic features, the East African Rift is a current, ongoing process, and the Great Rift Valley is a more historic geographical one, used to describe a larger system of interrelated rifts. The rift's fiery wake-up call. The East African Rift is more than a stagnant fissure in the Earth's crust. It's a seething cauldron of volcanoes and earthquakes, a grim reminder of the awesome forces that churn beneath our feet. As the Somali and Nubian plates creep apart, stress accumulates along fault lines, occasionally bursting through in fits of earthquake activity. In contrast to the giant, cataclysmic earthquakes at subduction boundaries, the East African Rift earthquakes are moderate in size but frequent and plentiful enough to reshape the terrain. They are usually accompanied by surface deformations visible to the naked eye, such as deep fractures and ground collapse, as the continent slowly breaks apart. Volcanism is another significant indicator of the active nature of the rift. The thinned crust within the rift enables magma from the Earth's mantle to flow towards the surface, and hence frequent volcanic eruptions. Erta Ale in Ethiopia and Mount Nyiragongo in the Democratic Republic of Congo are two of Africa's most active volcanoes and are located within the rift zone. In 2005, a sudden occurrence in Ethiopia's Afar saw a 60-kilometer-long rift suddenly emerge overnight as an eruption of the Dabahu volcano. These occurrences show how volcanic processes contribute importantly to rifting by increasingly filling gaps as a result of the opening apart tectonic plates with new crust. The combination of volcanic activity and earthquakes makes the East African Rift system one of the world's most geologically dangerous locations. The Afar Depression, for example, is beset by perpetual seismic shuddering and volcanic unrest, offering an otherworldly landscape of lava lakes, steam-emitting fissures, and hot sulfur springs. Researchers believe that the magma beneath the rift not only fuels eruptions, but also accelerate the process of rifting, pulling the plates apart more quickly than elsewhere at other divergent boundaries worldwide. Consequently, East Africa's landscape is experiencing one of the fastest continental transformations seen on our planet. The long-term consequences of the seismic and volcanic activity are enormous. With time, the perpetual fracturing and magma upwelling will deepen the rift valley further, so much so that eventually ocean water will flood into it and create a new sea. But for the millions of people who inhabit this geologically unstable region, more pressing are the earthquake-induced damage to infrastructure, displacement from volcanic eruptions, and the added risk of newly opening fissures in unpredictable places. Geologists keep these dangers under surveillance through satellite imaging and seismic sensors to monitor the motion of magma and tectonic movements. The searing forces tearing apart the East African Rift are a living laboratory for the way continents are riven asunder, one earthquake and volcanic eruption at a time. Earth's future ocean bed. The Afar Depression of northern Ethiopia is one of the most geologically distinctive and harsh environments on our planet. The low-lying area lies at the junction of three enormous tectonic plates, the Somali, Nubian, and Arabian plates, and, as such, is an important place to study the beginnings of continental rifting. The ground here is not only cracking apart at an increased rate, but also subsiding, as the thinned-out crust cannot handle the forces that are being exerted upon it. Scientists think that this basin will ultimately be the first region of East Africa to be flooded, creating the seabed of a future ocean. One of the most striking aspects of the Afar Depression is its volcanic activity, such as lava lakes, steaming fissures, and regular eruptions. The Erta Ale volcano, which is among the most active volcanoes in Africa, has had a continuous lava lake for decades, a rare occurrence on our planet. The fact that molten rock exists just below the surface means that the crust in this area is already acting more like an oceanic spreading center than a continental rift. The high heat and volcanic activity consistently erode the land, which further speeds up its downward movement. As new crust is created by ascending magma, the depression will be sinking even lower and will be even more prone to future flooding. Another key reason for the future oceanic formation in the Afar Depression is its closeness to the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. As the rift expands over millions of years, seawater from these adjacent bodies is likely to flood in, permanently submerging the area. Others have estimated that in 5 to 10 million years, the depression will be submerged underwater, the last stage of Africa's continental rifting. The process is a reverse of how the Atlantic Ocean was created, starting with a rift like the one that is already visible in East Africa, before gradually widening into a huge ocean. The Afar region thus gives scientists an actual time look at the initial stages of ocean basins' evolution. Though in the future the Afar Depression will undergo a geological change, it has had people living there for centuries and adapted to its harsh conditions. The Afar people, residents of the region, subsist on ancient traditions like salt harvesting from the huge salt pans. But as rifting increases, earthquakes, subsidence of the land, and volcanic eruptions become greater challenges to their way of life. Scientists continue to track the region with satellite imagery and GPS monitoring, carefully watching how quickly the landscape is evolving. The Afar Depression is a working laboratory for the study of plate tectonics, continental drift, and the eventual creation of a new ocean, a historic shift in Earth's geological history. But while the Afar Depression quietly sinks toward its oceanic future, a shocking event in Kenya gave the world a sudden and dramatic preview of just how fast the rift can crack open. Kenya's giant crack and its implications. One of the most dramatic and visible expressions of Africa's ongoing breakup occurred in March 2018, when a gigantic crack opened suddenly in Kenya's Great Rift Valley. The rift, some kilometers long and over 50 feet deep in some places, sliced through major highways, displaced families from their homes, and left scientists racing for answers. The report caused headlines across the world, provoking the following question: is Africa pulling apart faster than we knew? While some early pundits speculated that the rift was nothing more than intense rain erosion, closer inspection revealed that the rift was connected with the tectonic processes going on beneath the East African rift. This crack was not an isolated incident. It was a real-time window into the continent's gradual disunion. Contrary to slow spreading of rifts that take millions of years, this event showed how tectonic stress sometimes happens suddenly and dramatically. The crack opened near Mai Mahiu, a town west of Nairobi, in an area that had been previously marked by seismic activity. Witnesses heard a massive rumbling before the ground ripped apart, swallowing chunks of roads and homes. While the Kenya Rift is contained within a larger fault system extending across East Africa, its emergent nature is alarming for the potential implications to future movement upon infrastructure, agriculture, and indigenous peoples. It serves as a grim reminder that the East African Rift is not just some academic geologic concept, but is in fact presently actively reshaping the Earth's surface. Scientists believe the fissure is likely associated with deeper fault movement deep within the East African Rift. Seismic information indicates stress accumulating along several fault lines, which implies that such fissures may occur elsewhere in the region and trigger extensive damage. This presents a major threat to main highways, railroads, and cities located along the rift. As the plates continue to move apart, land areas may become more unstable, resulting in more seismic activity and land subsidence. Although the full separation of the Somali and Nubian plates will not occur for millions of years, the consequences of this gradual process are already being experienced, so preparedness is a top priority for governments and scientists. Although the ominousness of these cracks is alarming, they do not indicate that East Africa will split in one night. Geological phenomena occur over incredibly long time frames, and the continent's fragmentation is still an ongoing process. Nevertheless, the 2018 Kenya crack is a definitive indicator that tectonic movements are speeding up in some regions, providing scientists with a rare opportunity to observe continental breakup in process. With satellite imagery, ground sensors, and seismic information, geologists are tracking closely how the rift is developing and trying to anticipate where future fissures will appear. Although the creation of a new ocean is still millions of years off, occurrences such as these are forceful reminders that the Earth's surface is forever in flux, sometimes in patterns that are impossible to overlook. When will the new ocean emerge? The slow rifting of East Africa is preparing the ground for a new ocean to form, but when that will happen is still a topic of scientific conjecture. The breakup of continents and creation of oceans takes millions of years. According to present rifting rates, it is estimated that it may take 5 to 10 million years for the seawater to flood into the East African rift and form a complete ocean basin. Geological processes do not always follow a uniform rate, though, and the speed of separation may be affected by volcanic activity, earthquakes, and mantle dynamics. One of the first indications that this change is already in progress is the Afar Depression, which is below sea level and still sinking as the rift continues to grow. As the crust here thins and stretches, it is more susceptible to magma upwelling and faulting, speeding its fall. The depression's closeness to the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden indicates that, with sufficient time, ocean water will slowly flow in, making the Afar region the first new oceanic basin in Africa. The process is a repeat of the initial stages of the formation of the Atlantic Ocean, which started when South America and Africa gradually moved away from a similar rift system. Although large-scale flooding is not likely any time in the near future, the ongoing widening of the rift will cause deep valleys, new lakes, and stranded land masses to form before an ocean becomes fully established. Parts of the rift, such as Lake Tanganyika and Lake Malawi, already are acting like proto-oceanic basins, tectonically created deep bodies of water that may ultimately join into a larger system. Across millions of years, when the Somali Plate completely breaks off from the Nubian Plate, these bodies of water could merge into one seaway, the start of a new ocean. Despite these projections, predicting the exact timeline of ocean formation remains challenging due to the complexity of tectonic processes. Factors such as mantle convection, seismic activity, and regional climate conditions could influence the rate at which the rift expands and subsides. For now, scientists are closely monitoring the region using GPS data, satellite imaging, and seismic measurements to track the rift's progression. Though human societies will likely never see the creation of this new ocean for themselves, the East African Rift is one of the most dramatic demonstrations of the way that continents change and remold the world on geological timescales. Life on a splitting continent. With ongoing expansion of the East African Rift, millions already feel its influence in the region. The Earth forces at play are not only sculpting the terrain, they're also fragmenting communities, roads, and economies. Constant earthquakes, sagging earth, and the slow rending apart of the rift make towns, highways, and fields susceptible to partition. Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania are among the hardest hit areas, where surprise cracks like the one that opened in Kenya's Rift Valley in 2018 have already forced families from their homes and disrupted transport routes. While the full continental breakup will not be completed in millions of years, its effects are being felt now and will increase in magnitude. One of the most urgent problems is infrastructure stability. Many of East Africa's key transport arteries, including highways and railway lines, traverse the rift zone. As the Earth continues to shift, roads are cracking, bridges are destabilizing, and rail connections may become increasingly difficult to maintain. Urban developments built across active fault lines could suffer higher structural damage with greater frequency through seismic activity, and urban design within these places will become more complicated. Governments will need to invest in earthquake-resistant structures, better monitoring, and infrastructure able to withstand creep of land in order to lower long-term threats. Agriculture, a backbone of East Africa's economy, is also at risk. The East African Rift cuts through some of the continent's most fertile ground, supporting millions of farmers who depend on stable ground and reliable weather patterns. As the ground moves and new cracks appear, water sources can be disrupted, soil content can alter, and unpredictable earthquakes can destroy crops and irrigation systems. Moreover, volcanic ash related to rifting activity has the potential to alter the soil's mineral content, leading to increased fertility in some areas or soil loss in others. This inconsistency presents a long-term food security problem and requires adaptive agricultural practices to keep pace with changing conditions. Aside from agriculture and infrastructure, whole communities might ultimately have to be relocated as rifting gains speed. This is a long-term effect, but regions of high subsidence or heightened seismicity might be rendered too unstable for permanent residence. Some areas, like the Afar Depression, are already experiencing extreme geology that makes inhabitation challenging. As the rift continues to increase in size, governments and other international agencies will need to anticipate potential displacement measures, making access to new ground, resources, and economic benefits available to those populations that fall under it. The East African Rift is not just a geological event, it is a human crisis playing out in slow motion, and how East Africa responds to these challenges will shape the future of the region for generations to come. The technology monitoring Earth's breakup. The gradual but persistent rifting of the African continent is one of the most spectacular geological processes underway today, and scientists are monitoring its course with the most advanced technology. Classical field observation geology is no longer adequate to monitor the gradual but relentless movement of the Somali and Nubian plates. Instead, advanced satellite imagery, GPS networks, and radar interferometry are being used to track even the smallest movement of the Earth's crust. These technologies allow scientists to detect changes in ground level, measure the rate of plate movement, and track the emergence of new fissures with incredible precision. The most important tool to apply in tracking the East African Rift is the GPS, Global Positioning System, technology. An array of GPS stations spaced along the rift provides real-time data on how the Earth is moving. The stations are capable of measuring movements of a few millimeters per year, allowing scientists to track at what rate sections of the rift are opening up. At Ethiopia's Afar region, where rifting is most active, GPS data have established that the crust is opening more quickly than initially predicted, further corroborating that this area will be the first to become an oceanic basin. One more powerful instrument that is being used is synthetic aperture radar interferometry, or INSAR, which uses satellite-mounted radar to measure tiny ground motions over time. Unlike GPS stations, which are point-based measures, INSAR can take detailed maps of surface motion in large areas and show where the land is subsiding, elongating, or rising. This has been found especially useful in monitoring regions susceptible to seismic activity, such as the Afar Depression and the Kenya's Great Rift Valley, where spontaneous ground cracks have been witnessed. Scientists can predict zones of high risk for future cracking based on this data, permitting governments to anticipate timely disruptions. Since volcanic activity is central to the rifting process, tracking magma movement under the ground is also important. Seismic detectors, heat cameras, and gas emission monitors are being deployed to monitor large rift volcanoes. For example, Erta Ali in Ethiopia and Tanzania's Ol Doinyo Lengai. Seismic waves are employed by scientists to trace magma chambers and detect ground movements, with the purpose of issuing early warnings of impending eruptions. Combined, these technologies are providing scientists with an unparalleled capability to see, to measure, and to forecast the rift's evolution, revealing valuable insights into the creation of a future ocean and the evolving landscape of Africa. The technology tracking Africa's slow breakup is astonishing, but what happens next, when the continent finally splits, will reshape the world as we know it. The future of a fragmented Africa. As the East African Rift continues to grow, the incremental but inexorable fragmentation of the African continent raises profound questions regarding the geography of the future. Within the next 5 to 10 million years, the Somali plate will fully detach from the Nubian plate and create a new ocean, which will ultimately redefine Africa's coastline. The nations now dividing the rift, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, and Mozambique will experience gradual but irreparable geographic alteration, with portions of their land masses increasingly separating. This will create profoundly altered maps in the future, with a new island continent formed from what today is the Horn of Africa and parts of East Africa. The formation of a new ocean will revolutionize world trade routes, climatic patterns, and ecosystems. A new seaway such as the Red Sea will be formed, potentially bringing with it economic advantages such as new shipping routes and fisheries. The slow flooding of lowland areas, particularly around Ethiopia's Afar Depression, however, will relocate humans long before an ocean forms fully. The changing climate of the region can also bring in unexpected impacts, as oceanic humidity and shifting wind patterns affect local rainfall and desertification processes. Certain regions may become drier, while others might receive more rainfall, remaking agriculture and biodiversity in the region. Politically and socially, the gradual splitting of the African continent poses issues that will need to be solved well before the new ocean has developed. Cross-border relations, urban planning, and infrastructure will be more and more impacted by the widening rift. Nations sharing the rift could be forced to cooperate on massive projects to adjust roads, bridges, and settlements to a changing landscape. Governments will be required to build long-term strategies for disaster preparation, especially where there are vulnerabilities to earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The coming fragmentation of Africa will not come as a momentary phenomenon, but as a lengthy process calling for proactive adjustment on the part of the millions inhabiting its root. And that's the shocking reality of Africa's splitting continent. What do you think about it? Will this be the birth of a brand new ocean, or are we underestimating the speed of this transformation? Let's talk about it in the comments. If you found this video eye-opening, hit that like button to help more people discover this mind-blowing event. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into Earth's biggest changes. And if you're curious about more incredible shifts happening on our planet, click on the next video right here on the screen. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.